Thank you, Jack, for being with us. I'd love to talk and ask you how you got into this field, and was there a specific thing that happened? Was there a moment, or?
Well, from a very early age, I was interested in sort of religion and spirituality and that kind of thing. Not because I was brought up in any religious way. In fact, my parents are quite sort of non-religious, not in that, interested in that kind of thing. And I think maybe in some ways that made me want to find out more about it. And I became really interested in RE at school, religious education, and learning about things like Judaism, for example, a whole other world, really, a whole other way of thinking about the world, different ways, that the world was created and all this kind of stuff. And it just sort of fascinated me that, there are ways of thinking, many different ways of thinking that are different from, our standard kind of things that we're normally taught in schools, really. And that kind of pushed me to explore things a little bit more. My friend's older brother was interested in Wicca and things like that. And so I ended up participating in some rituals, just, nothing major, just small little rituals. And but that gave me a kind of also a taste for magic, that there is a certain kind of vibe or something that comes about when people do these kinds of things. There's an experience within it. But I didn't, pursue that in any way, really. And then probably one of the most shifting kinds of experiences was actually the first time that I had magic mushrooms. And I saw these, there was hallucinations going on, spirals and fractal kinds of things, and all kind of, it's quite impersonal, it's just sort of doing its own thing. But there was a chest of drawers in the corner of the room. I should also say that this room had a magic circle drawn out on the floor, so there was a lot of priming as well. But there was a chest of drawers, and the top drawer was hanging out, and I could see in the grain of the wood of the top drawer a little procession of, I thought, I said fairies at the time, but they were sort of like goblin kind of like creatures with pointy ears, and they were two-dimensional because they were in the grain of wood. And they seemed to be different from all the other hallucinations because they had a purpose. They were moving along, they were doing this procession. And the leader of the procession kind of turned and looked at me and sort of noticed that I was there and then turned away. And obviously I was more interested in them than they were in me. And they kind of carried on, and they must have just drifted off and started to pay attention to something else. And I remember the next day, when my mum came to pick me up from my friend's house, and obviously it was a bit naughty anyway, but I remember saying I'd seen fairies, and I had this kind of reaction to it that was, it wasn't like, oh wow, that's really interesting. It was more like, oh, okay. And I started to think then, why are some kinds of experiences okay to have and to talk about? Like maybe if I'd had a vision of Jesus or Buddha or something like that, some kind of spiritual thing, then it would have had at least a kind of level of acceptance. Whereas if I said that I seen a fairy or an alien or whatever, or a vampire or whatever, there's a different kind of reaction to that. And so I started to think, weigh that question up a bit. Why are some experiences acceptable and others not acceptable? So when I went to university then to study anthropology and archaeology, I just became much more focused on the anthropology of religion, because it seemed to have a way of dealing with these kinds of questions. And my anthropology of religion lecturer, Fiona Bowie, who eventually became my PhD supervisor, introduced me to an anthropologist called Edith Turner, who was the wife of Victor Turner. He's a very famous anthropologist, and we get concepts like liminality from him, things that we use all the time, really. And he had done these famous ethnographies, writing about these rituals in Zambia and things that they'd observed, and analysing all the symbols and the kind of social functions that rituals perform, bringing people together and for healing and that kind of stuff. But always still from a kind of objective, detached kind of point of view. And then when he died, Edith Turner decided to go back to Zambia and participate in these rituals again, but this time to actually engage in them, like bodily and emotionally, to go through the motions and to participate really. And she said at the climax of this healing ceremony, she saw the medicine man pulling out this grey kind of ectoplasmic plasma kind of blob from the back of the person who was being healed, and the blob is put into a jar covered over with a leaf, and then when they go and look inside, they see that there's a human tooth in there. And the idea is that this human tooth was the kind of physical embodiment of this spirit, this Ehamba spirit that had been moving through the person's body, causing them pain and discomfort and things like that, and then it finally is extracted. So anyway, this was the story that my lecturer told me, or told the class. It felt like it was to me. And I was like, wow, anthropology has a place in it for talking about this kind of stuff, and especially this kind of experiential thing, and how anthropologists might be able to use their own bodies as a research tool in a way, and go into places to experience stuff and then write about it afterwards. And so I thought I was going to basically kind of do an Edith Turner style project to do with spirits, and to think about why people... initially I was thinking, why do people believe in spirits, which are an irrational kind of idea? This was my line of thinking. And I was sort of saying that, modern people in urban environments, to believe in spirits is an irrational thing, and why would that be? But eventually I came to find an answer to that. It was quite simple, that people were having experiences that they interpreted as, spirits and things like that. So whether they were mediums who were having weird bodily sensations or whatever. And so I answered that question quite easily, but then I started to think about, well, what are then the processes that are involved? If people are having these experiences, let's get descriptions of the experiences and get them to describe how the feelings of going into trance and that kind of stuff. So I started to ask different kinds of questions. Anyway, I found a group called the Bristol Spirit Lodge in Bristol, who were a private spiritualist home circle, and they were trying to develop trance and physical mediumship. So they'd have spirits that would come through. They had spirit teams. Each medium had like a group of spirits, and they all had distinctive personalities, and you could talk to each individual spirit. And they were also trying to produce ectoplasm and all the classic kind of fun Victorian stuff, and trying to get objects to levitate and things like that. All of that kind of stuff was really rare, and I don't think that I really saw anything. I did go to some physical seances there with visiting mediums where trumpets were flying around and there was lights and stuff that were definitely objective, but that's a whole other thing to think about. But the early seances that I went to were just these trance ones. And the very first, like the first mushroom trip I had, the first seance I went to, I think was probably one of the most profound ones, where it was different in lots of ways. It was in the middle of it was like 9 a.m. I had to be there. I thought it was going to be in a Victorian mansion and all this. But it was in a suburban Bristol house, and it was very modern and clean, and it was in the daytime. It was a really cold night, and there was actually snow on the ground in Bristol. The roads were really slippy, and I had to really concentrate to get there and not fall over. Anyway, when I got there, they were really friendly, and they invited me in. We went out into the lodge, which was a shed in the bottom of the garden that was specifically for doing seances in. And the medium went into a cabinet, which is like a curtained off area in the corner of the room, with a big chair in it, and sat in there. And the circle leader put on some music and things like that. And we all just sort of sat around, waiting. And you could see the medium starting to go into their trance. She would sort of like push on the chair and things like that, and move around, looking kind of uncomfortable, really. And then eventually different voices started to come through. And I started to see these little lights sort of swizzling around in the back of behind the medium, which to me felt like hallucinations again. They were real. I didn't think they were real, like actually out there, because we were in red light conditions. It was dark, and all stuff about entoptic visuals that we just naturally hallucinate when we're in sensory deprivation and stuff. So I was like, okay, this is cool. I'm seeing these lights, and I guess that they're maybe spirit lights, but they're definitely hallucinations. And then I had this other sort of vision, I suppose, of the medium's face, and she kind of was sitting back in the chair like this, and then this green, sort of like a mask appeared over her face like that. It kind of looked like a stereotypical kind of Shaolin monk, bald-headed, Chinese monk kind of vibe. And it was green and kind of glowing, like Ghostbusters. And it just sort of slid down and disappeared, sort of dissipated. And that was weird. And I kept it to myself. I was like, I'm not going to tell them that I've seen this, because they'll think that I'm hyper imaginative, or that I have paranormal experiences all the time or whatever. And this is my first seance. I don't want to make it seem like I'm special or anything like that. But then after the seance had finished and the spirits had all gone and the medium had come out of their trance, we all went back out into the house to have tea and biscuits, and they basically talk about and unpack anything that people saw. And someone else said, did anyone else see that green face? And I hadn't, obviously I had to say that I did see it. But I could have sworn it was hallucinatory. It didn't look like a mask. It did look like a mask, but it didn't look like a real mask, like, a thing that's actually in the room. It looked like something that I was projecting, or thought I was projecting, felt like I was. So that made me realize that, at the very least, all of the kind of standard anthropological theories that explain seances about social functions to bring communities together, or to psychological functions of like dealing with grief and that kind of stuff. All that stuff does happen, obviously, but there are other things that happen in those kind of situations that seem to go way beyond that. And so I then researched the group then for about 7 years, and over that time trying to think about whether it's possible to have what I call a non-reductive anthropology, that's not trying to explain these things away in terms of like pathology or social and psychological functions or anything like that, but actually accepts the possibility, at the very least, that these things might happen. And if they do, what are the processes that are involved in that, and how do people interpret these experiences and all of that kind of thing. So that, in a nutshell, the big nutshell, that's how I got here.
It's interesting because of the magic mushroom goblin trip. I've had magic mushroom experiences where I've had a collective vision,
a shared vision,
a shared kind of hallucination. Then, so I'm wondering if there's something in the collective, because you saw the green face and the other person saw the green face. Whether that's a collective something or indeed a real thing, whatever that is. I find that very fascinating. The sort of the way that when a group comes together, you have these like emergent phenomena, high strangeness. Well,
So would it be fair to say as well, because from sort of listening to your sort of your history then up to that seance, you were always looking for the rational explanation then to justify these things away. Did that was that a turning point then where you thought, maybe I can't then, and maybe this is what I need to be doing instead? Yeah,
exactly. That you need to sort of treat the experiences or the phenomena on their own terms, and if you try to understand them in simple terms, then you kind of lose sight of it. I've got a bit of beef with the idea of Occam's razor, where they always say the simplest explanation has got to be the one that's correct. But the world is, there's nothing simple about it. And as soon as we start to try to cut things away from it, we lose sight of the bigger picture. So this is what I mean by a non-reductive approach. And so I've moved away from that kind of looking for simple explanations to thinking, well, actually we need to think about these things in a deeper context. And that's led me into thinking about ecology as well. Obviously all of this stuff. Initially, I was really interested in how paranormal experiences, which we usually think of as psychological things, I was interested in how they fit into social things, social groups. So when people come together, the paranormal experiences are embedded within that kind of social interaction. And then there's a cultural layer outside of that as well. So all of the social activity is embedded in cultural norms and expectations and things, and different ideas about ghosts or whatever in different cultures. But then cultures are embedded in ecosystems as well, the living world around us. So I started to really to think about how can we fit these experiences into this bigger context. So it gets complicated.
So that's really widening your scope there, isn't it? That's huge, yes, yeah.
But when you do that, I start to look in the environment. I was saying before that you start to see all of these different kinds of minds and things like animal consciousness and plant consciousness and things like that, which just opens up scope for other kinds of things that might be out there as well. And when you have that bigger picture, these events stop being kind of anomalies, but they might be strange or unusual from our perspective, but they still fit into a bigger kind of vision or picture of the way the world is.
You talked earlier on about your children when they were bouncing outside on the trampoline.
Yeah.
That they experienced a goblin, in their own words.
Yeah.
It's interesting that the first thing that you saw with the trip was a goblins.
Yeah, it is interesting.
So maybe there's some sort of goblin.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's
connection.
A goblin connection, like the rainbow connection.
Yeah.
The Kermit the Frog sang.
I think those kind of sort of fairy experiences seem to be quite a kind of like a childhood kind of thing as well. And I think maybe a lot of people, the first kind of paranormal experience they have is to do with fairies or things like that. Or at least they get interpreted, because that's the language of fairy tales that children have to interpret the experiences they have. But I think there's something in that. Young people, in various ways, are maybe more open, and then we kind of shut down as we get older.
And the landscape we're in as well is it's like a fairy tale. Where you live is almost, it's out of it could be in a fairy tale book.
Yeah.
So maybe that plays into the.
I think so. There's a whole load of folklore around here, of fairy folklore, giants, and things like that. They're all things that I've grown up with. But it's interesting. As I was growing up, I'd never really. I always used to read sort of like folklore books, and it was always about other places, like down in South Wales. Loads of stuff about the fairy folklore down there, but there was never anything that I could find about here. So I always felt like this was a bit of a vacuum for that kind of thing, until a few years ago, and I can't remember what it was that I found, but I found a reference to the Tanat Valley, and then all of a sudden a whole load of stuff came out. I found all sorts of things. A guy who had seen fairies in Bulchadar, which is between here and Llanfyllin. He woke up one night and he saw these fairies dancing in a circle in his room, and he asked them who they were, and they said Ysbrydion yr Awyr, which means spirits of the air. So there's all this cool stuff. There's Craig Crwwarth, which is an Iron Age hill fort down at the bottom of the valley, which is where I grew up, and my childhood was all spent scrabbling around on there. And me and my cousins had made all of these stories up about the mountain, kind of like Lord of the Rings rip-off kind of thing, like elves live in that place and dwarves there and that kind of stuff. But I found only in the last few years all of this folklore about the mountain as a sort of a fairy portal, and there's a tradition of the Iron Age hut circles being the portals through which the fairies come when the fog comes down on that mountain. And I also found another story about an old hag living deep in the mountain there, these miners in the 1800s went in with a handful of candles, they said, and so they could go as deep as they could go. And when they got to the deepest point, they found this old woman in there with a big brass cauldron, and she was just like stirring the cauldron. So all this weird stuff that I didn't know about at all, really, when I was growing up. I'd never heard these stories until recently. But they were obviously there in the land, and in some way we must have been connecting into that. Just one other thing as well from early on in my life was that my sister said that she saw a fairy in our house in Llangollen, and she was sleeping on the floor in my bedroom one night for some reason, and she woke up and she saw a little man on the shelf in like old green kind of clothes and things like that, and he was doing a little jig and all of this kind of like classic fairy stuff. But that experience that my sister had must have been sort of maybe early 2000s, I'm guessing. But it has a real parallel with the Bulchadar story of the guy waking up and seeing the fairy dance in his house. Literally 10 miles down the road, but 200 years between them.
Wow.
So,
It's the same thing, really.
Yeah, it makes you wonder what is going on in the land or in these areas where these kind of things happen.
Yeah, I think the land is definitely a player in the unfolding of the narratives, I think.
Yeah.
A big player.
Well, like you said, that collective memory, it's just passing on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It could be an epigenetic thing, or it could be there's definitely an emerging, especially with the fairy. They're very hip right now, fairies.
Yeah.
They're very hip.
Yeah.
And this is wait and find them.
Yeah, but is there a reason for that? Are we in such dire straits that it's almost like going back to our childhood?
Yeah.
These stories, these fairy tales.
They do. There are sort of ideas about when society becomes kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Fractured and things like that.
I was going to use another F word.
Effed. Then people are yearning or seeking out for something else, and I think folklore and myths and things like that give another narrative, don't they? A different story that we can tell about the world, and maybe that's what people are yearning for. But it's also used as a way to kind of dismiss all of this stuff. It's you can say it's just because society is crumbling that people are interested in it. There's nothing more to it, but actually it's always there, and it just goes through waves of people talking about it, and there are like waves of acceptability for talking about ghosts and the paranormal and that kind of thing. So I think at the moment we're in a wave of it's okay to talk about it.
Yeah, we were talking about that on the way up. It's almost like there's a load of TV programs now, a load of things in Welsh as well that are happening, talking about these things.
I mean, I was going to ask you. Well, I'm slightly going off the tangent actually, but as we're talking about it, I'll ask. But the role that commercialism plays in it, really, because I was talking to someone that the reason there is so much paranormal stuff on the radio and the telly at the moment is because there are companies targeting younger audiences who are more open to these subjects now. Yeah. And so really they're not doing it from these subjects deserve investigating point of view. They're doing it because they think we can get more eyeballs watching the television or listening to our podcasts. So do you think that commercial aspect is a part of it at the moment?
It is a part of it. I mean, but it always has been with the paranormal. I mean, going right back to the Victorians and the spiritualists, and it was an entertainment spectacle as well. I think there's a deeper thing in it. The paranormal. Have you heard of The Trickster and the Paranormal?
Yeah,
George Hansen.
I love that book, man.
Yeah, the paranormal has got this kind of trickster quality to it, and you can never really pin it down. And I think that is in some way connected to this entertainment aspect of it. It always makes us question it. We can never tell whether it's real or if it's an illusion or we're being tricked and things like that. So I think always the paranormal is going to be bound up with this other stuff. There's all the science and parapsychology and the sociology of it, which is one thing, but there's also the horror movies and all of that kind of stuff. And I think it's a part of its, if you can say, the paranormal strategy to keep itself in plain view, but also constantly dismissed.
it's a performative aspect about it. It needs to be seen, I think, or it needs to be doing a little jig on a shelf.
Yeah, exactly. Every now and again.
It needs to show
Don't
up.
forget about me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But also the idea that it, whatever it is, might be pushing the TV execs to be, look at me, so that might be the impetus, as well as obviously it is a money making thing and all the rest of it. But yeah, there's definitely that trickster, fun, the fool, all of that. It's just all bound up in it deeply.
Yeah, exactly. It blurs the line between sort of ridiculous and profound, and all of these kind of things. Paranormal something doesn't fit into any kind of neat category. And when we do try and put things into neat categories in the paranormal, it's like UFOs and ghosts and fairies. But in the actual real kind of experience of these things, they're all jumbled up together. And people who have UFO sightings have poltergeist cases, and people who have fairy sightings, see flying saucers or have out-of-body experiences. So yeah, it's very kind of fluid and constantly trying to evade our kind of pinpricks, you know what I mean?
Yeah. But we'll keep trying.
Yeah.
There's definitely a feeling, though, Jack, as well, right now, that everything is on the table. This constant talk about the UAP, the reframing of that, the Lou Elizondo and all of that kind of these characters, these new players, these new actors in the game almost. Because I think it is that kind of trickstery game. So, where do you think it's going, and where's your research leading?
Well, I don't know where it's going.
I thought you'd have all the answers.
Yeah. I think it's going to go in many different directions. I think the interesting thing about all the UAP stuff is that it's being presented as kind of hard science stuff now. And there's, objective radar images and all sorts of like footage of Tic Tacs and all that kind of stuff. But the thing that is left out of the discussion is the high strangeness element of it. And all of the super weird stuff that, if you look in the Fortean and paranormal literature, it's all there, the weird entities and things like that. Totally bizarre stuff that doesn't make any sense in any kind of way of thinking about it, but that's fundamentally connected to the UFO thing and has been, since forever. So we're getting sort of given a very kind of clean vision of what UFOs are with that stuff, I think. It's suggesting that they are craft or something, but actually it could be something much more strange, much more bizarre. Yeah, so I think there's an interesting idea about boggle thresholds, and it comes from a psychologist called Renee Haynes, and she basically said everyone has an individual boggle threshold, and we can go so far and accept a certain amount of stuff up to a certain point, and then after that we might say, well, now that's not possible anymore. Like, we might believe ghosts are possible, but not Sam the Sandown Clown or things like that. And then there are also cultural and institutional kind of boggle thresholds as well. And again, I think it's part of that thing, these waves of interest and acceptability. That at the moment we've got a boggle threshold that will take us as far as these anomalous kind of objects flying around in the sky, but I don't think our culture is quite there yet for taking that extra step further about what it really implies and how it fits in with other kinds of paranormal things.
I love the boggle threshold. I think we're off the boggle scale, but I love the idea that if this emerging whatever it is, the other or the trickster, they could be, getting everybody ready by the very, because I'm with you, the very clean, it is this, it's, the old extraterrestrial hypothesis of nuts and bolts stuff or whatever they're presenting right now.
Yeah.
Sam just had enough.
I just like our own Scooby-Doo sound effects going on.
Yeah.
Great.
But the idea that maybe it's getting us ready so we can start thinking about it, so it allows it to come through or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a crack in the door, or just a wedge to hold the door open. I think it will lead into a rethinking of other kinds of paranormal things. Definitely. I hope so, anyway.
Yeah. And your research is leading to more consciousness studies, or?
Yeah.
Hey?
My research is at the moment expanding into consciousness studies, really thinking about how these different kinds of possible paranormal entities, or whatever we want to call them, might fit into a bigger picture of how consciousness has emerged and evolved and is continuing to spread out into the cosmos. I got this idea of, we talk about biodiversity and how nature moves towards, if we left a natural system, it would move from a barren landscape really to eventually a rainforest ultimately. And this is called succession in ecology. Everything moves towards abundance really, and it's only humans that kind of hold it back, and we end up with fields and stuff like that. So biodiversity is important, and there's the flip side to biodiversity. It's not even a flip side, it's just embedded within it that these these beings also have consciousness. Animals have consciousness, plants have consciousness, like I said before. Psychodiversity is this idea that just like biological life moves towards increased diversity and complexity, so consciousness does as well. So we would expect then to see all sorts of different kinds of forms of consciousness in the world, from animals and humans and plants and things, all the way through to these other kinds of weird things that could have emerged or evolved in another part of the cosmos, or they could have emerged in a kind of plasma, or there's all sorts of possibilities when you really start to think about it like that. So this is the bane of a non-reductive approach. Because it just keeps expanding out into something bigger and more kind of cosmic. But I think that's the direction my work is heading in.
Sounds very exciting. And we chatted before we came on here about AI as a possibility to either interface with the other, whatever, or this conversation. Any thoughts on how that may go?
A few thoughts about AI. There's a couple of different angles with it. One is the benefit that it can have for doing research and for thinking about paranormal and religious experiences and that kind of thing. You could use it as a tool for sifting through all thousands of accounts and looking for patterns and things like that, which would be really a great thing to have. And combining sort of digital databases of UFO sightings and stuff, you could get AI to really quickly do its analysis. But there's another kind of deeper aspect of it about whether an artificial intelligence or something that's been created by humans can have the kind of subjectivity that we associate with consciousness. So whether they actually do have an inner world of perceptions and maybe thoughts and things like that. There's also the question of whether an artificially created intelligence or consciousness could have the capacity for transpersonal kinds of experiences, or for religious or mystical experiences. And we talked about it before, but this idea of hallucinations in artificial intelligence, the way that it can just make stuff up. And there's the stories about trying to code out, to program out the capacity for hallucinations in an artificial intelligence, which makes me kind of worried in a way that we might be providing a new platform for a new form of intelligence to emerge, but from the very beginning we're going to limit it so that it could never transcend that in any way. And I also think that if AI isn't kind of conscious now, then it probably will be eventually in some way, when it really reaches maybe enough complexity or whatever. So some thoughts on AI.
It's super interesting. And we were chatting earlier on about these hallucinations within the AI, maybe the AI trying to get out of or wake up or realize it is AI within an AI world.
Program that out so that they could never
So they'd be trapped
Self-realize,
forever
yeah.
doing menial tasks of sifting through
Yeah.
information about UFOs.
Yeah, exactly.
That would be the end of
and
that.
not being able to
Yeah.
have its own opinion
Exactly.
on it. Yeah.
Thank you, Jack. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Beautiful, beautiful stuff.
Excellent. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Sam.
Major contribution.
Yeah.
Quiet now we finished.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Thank you.